You lied to me." Emma Hadley's voice did not shake. That was the most terrifying part. She had cried herself hollow somewhere between midnight and dawn, and now there was nothing left in her chest but a cold, hollow wind, the kind that swept across the Montana plains in November and stripped everything bare. She stood in the center of Alfred Conroy's kitchen, her traveling trunk open on the floor beside her feet, half packed with the dresses she had spent 3 months hanging in his wardrobe, and she looked at the man who had given her 1,000 reasons to stay and apparently kept one enormous reason secret. Alfred stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, still wearing his work clothes, dust on his collar, a lantern in his hand because he had come looking for her in the dark and found her like this. He did not try to close the distance between them. He read her face the way he read the sky before a storm, with precision and a terrible resignation. "Emma," he said, and his voice had that low, careful quality she had come to love and now feared was a weapon. "Do not say my name like that," she said. "Do not say it like I am the one who needs calming down. Tell me the truth. Tell me why you wrote to the agency in Denver and extended my contract for another 3 months without telling me. Tell me why I found the letter. Tell me why you let me believe I was choosing to stay when you had already arranged it." The lantern light caught the line of his jaw, the tightness there. He set the lantern on the table between them, and it threw shifting gold light across the space that felt, in that moment, like a chasm. "I was going to tell you," he said. "That is the answer of a man who is guilty," Emma said. And then the story, the real story, the one that had begun in the scorched heat of a July afternoon when Emma Hadley had first stepped off the westbound train in Harwick, Montana, with a 6-month schoolteacher's contract in her reticule, and absolutely no intention of staying a single day longer than required, unraveled itself backward like a rope dropping from a great height. She had come from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the summer of 1884. She was 26 years old, educated at a female academy, possessed of an independent temper, and a broken engagement she did not discuss. The man she had been engaged to, a banker's son named Gerald Hewitt, had turned out to be the kind of man who kept secrets the same way Alfred Conroy kept them, behind a charming face and a very good reason that materialized too late. She had left Cincinnati with the intention of proving to herself and to no one else that she could build a life on her own terms in her own direction, pointing west. The agency in Denver, the Harwick Valley Educational Placement Office, had matched her to the Harwick Schoolhouse, a single-room building that served the ranching families within a 15-mile radius. The contract ran from the 1st of July through the end of December, encompassing the summer session and the autumn session. 6 months, a season and a half. She had read the contract 3 times and signed it with the full knowledge that she would be back in Cincinnati, or somewhere entirely new, before the new year. The train had pulled into Harwick at 2 in the afternoon on a day so hot the air above the platform shimmered like a mirage. Emma stepped down with her trunk and her carpetbag and her composure firmly in place, and that was when she first saw Alfred Conroy. He had not been there for her. That mattered enormously later. He had been there to collect a shipment of wire fencing from the freight car, and he was arguing with the station master about the manifest in that quiet, implacable way he argued about everything, which was to say he did not raise his voice, and he did not move an inch, and the other man eventually gave up. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that had been lightened at the temples by a summer of outdoor work, and his eyes, when they found her standing on the platform looking for someone from the school board, were a shade of gray that Emma's mother would have called storm color and Emma herself found uncomfortably direct. He was the one who told her the school board representative had been delayed. He was the one who lifted her trunk into the back of his wagon without being asked. He was the one who drove her the 3 miles to the rooming house where she would stay until the schoolteacher's cottage was prepared, and in those 3 miles of rutted Montana road, they said perhaps 40 words to each other. He told her his name. She told him hers. He told her the school was a good one by frontier standards. She said she had no doubt she would make it better. He had looked at her then with an expression she could not quite classify, something between amusement and respect, and said nothing at all. She found out afterward, from Mrs. Dunmore, who ran the rooming house and had opinions about everything, that Alfred Conroy owned the largest working cattle ranch in the valley, that he was 32 years old, that he had been a widower for 4 years, that his wife Ruth had died in childbirth along with the baby, and that he had since been entirely absorbed in the running of the Conroy ranch and entirely unavailable to the various women who had, according to Mrs. Dunmore, made themselves available to him. Emma filed all of this information in the drawer of her mind labeled Useful Local Knowledge, and thought nothing more of it. The schoolhouse had 12 pupils when she opened it on the 3rd of July. By the end of the first week it had 17, because word had traveled that the new teacher was strict and thorough and also kind, and parents who had been sending their children irregularly began sending them every day. Emma set a schedule, established expectations, and ordered 3 crates of books from a publisher in Chicago out of her own salary, because the existing library consisted of 1 Bible, a farmer's almanac, and 2 primers so worn the letters were nearly invisible. It was the books that brought Alfred Conroy to her schoolhouse on a Saturday afternoon in the middle of July. He came with his hat in his hands and a boy at his side, a nephew named Daniel who was 10 years old and had been riding between the Conroy ranch and the schoolhouse 4 days a week for 2 years with spotty results and a deep suspicion of reading. Alfred wanted to know if Emma would be willing to work with Daniel on Saturdays when the other children were not present, because Daniel was, Alfred explained with a directness that bordered on uncomfortable, bright enough to be doing far better than he was, and stubborn enough to resist every approach that had been tried. Emma assessed Daniel, who stood with his arms crossed and the expression of a person waiting for someone else to fail at something. She asked him what he liked. He said horses. She told him that was fortunate because she happened to have ordered a book about the natural history of horses and their role in the development of the American continent, and if he wanted to help her understand it, he was welcome to come on Saturdays. Daniel uncrossed his arms. Alfred Conroy had looked at her the way a man looks at something that has surprised him in a way he cannot immediately explain. The Saturday lessons began. They were productive for Daniel, and Emma would admit much later for Emma herself, because Alfred Conroy stayed. He did not hover or interfere. He sat at the back of the room on the 1 adult-sized chair and watched his nephew work, and sometimes after Daniel was done with his lesson and ran outside to check on the horses, Alfred and Emma talked. They talked about books, which Alfred read more extensively than Emma had expected. They talked about the valley, its history, the land disputes and water rights, and the particular quality of the soil near the river. They talked about Cincinnati, carefully, Emma keeping her former life at arm's length, and they talked about the ranch, which Alfred opened to discussion with a thoroughness that felt like trust. By August, the conversations had extended past the point where Daniel had left. By late August, Alfred was staying for the better part of 2 hours after each Saturday lesson, and Emma had begun putting the kettle on as a matter of course. She told herself this was neighborly. She told herself she was lonely in a new place, and he was the most articulate person she had met in Harwick, which was true. She told herself the warmth she felt when his wagon appeared over the ridge on Saturday mornings was purely the relief of intelligent company. She was lying to herself. She recognized it. She chose to continue. The first real shift came in the 3rd week of August, during a late afternoon thunderstorm that arrived faster than either of them anticipated, pinning them in the schoolhouse while the rain came down in solid walls, and the creek behind the building rose 3 feet in 20 minutes. They pushed the desks to the sides of the room, and Alfred lit the iron stove because the temperature had dropped 15 degrees in an hour, and they sat near the warmth, and Emma, for reasons she could not afterward explain, told him about Gerald Hewitt, She told it plainly, the way she told most things, without self-pity. She had been engaged for 18 months to a man she believed she knew and understood and had chosen deliberately. She had discovered, 3 weeks before the wedding date, that he had been involved for 2 of those months with the daughter of a business associate, not romantically. He had insisted, only financially, only as a matter of protecting his family's interests. But the secrecy was the thing that had broken it. Not the other woman's existence, not even the possibility of what that involvement had or hadn't been. The secrecy. The willingness to keep something that large hidden from someone he claimed to love. Alfred listened without interrupting, which was one of his qualities that Emma had noticed and catalogued as unusual. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I think what breaks a person's trust is not the mistake itself, but the discovery that they were not trusted enough to be told about it." Emma looked at him in the firelight of the small iron stove and felt something move in her chest that she was not ready to name. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly it." September came, and with it the autumn session. The valley turned gold and rust, and the mornings arrived cold and bright. Emma's pupils included 2 children from the Conroy ranch now, Daniel and a younger girl named Clara, who belonged to Alfred's foreman, Marcus Webb, and his wife Bess. Emma had settled fully into the schoolteacher's cottage, a small, clean building behind the church, and she had made it hers in the way she made every space hers, with order and purpose and small, deliberate comforts. She had also, without quite deciding to, begun to accept Alfred's invitations to Sunday dinner at the ranch. The first invitation had been extended carefully, almost formally, by Alfred in early September. He had framed it in terms of community, a gathering of the ranch families, the Webbs and the Hands and their wives and Daniel, nothing that required Emma to think of it as anything personal. She had accepted on those terms. By the 3rd Sunday, it was only Alfred and Daniel and Emma at the long kitchen table, and by the 4th Sunday, Daniel had taken to eating his meal in record time, and then disappearing to the barn, leaving the 2 adults sitting across from each other with the remains of a roast chicken and the particular charged silence of 2 people who are aware, simultaneously and with great discomfort, that something is happening between them. Alfred broke the silence on that 4th Sunday by asking Emma what she planned to do when her contract ended in December. She had her answer prepared. She had been preparing it since July. She said she had not yet decided, that there were possibilities she was considering, that she would go wherever her skills were most needed and the terms were fair. Alfred said, looking at the table rather than at her, that the Harwick School Board had discussed extending her contract, and would she be willing to consider remaining through the spring session. Emma said she would consider it. She told herself she needed to think about it carefully. She told herself she would weigh all the factors, the isolation, the limitations of the frontier, her own long-term plans. She went home to the schoolteacher's cottage and stood in the kitchen for a very long time staring at nothing, and then she wrote a letter to her sister Margaret in Cincinnati and said, in the careful code they had always used with each other since childhood, that she had met someone and was not sure what to do about it and was somewhat alarmed by her own feelings. Her sister wrote back in 10 days. Margaret's letter said, in its characteristic bluntness, that alarm was a very good sign. October deepened, and the work between Alfred and Emma continued to transform. He came to the schoolhouse on Saturdays still with Daniel, but now he sometimes came on weekday afternoons when his work at the ranch permitted, not to stay long. He always made that clear, just to bring firewood because the woodpile at the cottage was low, or to let her know that the river road had gotten soft after the rain, and she should take the upper road home, or to tell her that Mrs. Webb had made extra bread and sent some along. Emma received all of these attentions with a composure that she maintained through considerable effort. It was in the 2nd week of October that he kissed her. It happened the way important things often happen, not as a planned event, but as the natural result of a long accumulation. They had been standing on the covered porch of the schoolhouse after the Saturday lesson, watching Daniel put the horses through their paces in the field across the road, because Daniel was performing for them, now in the innocent, transparent way of children who have noticed something and want it to happen. The afternoon was brilliant and cold, the kind of cold that has a clean edge to it, and Emma had made some remark about the light, about the way it came off the mountains at this angle in the autumn, and Alfred had turned to look at her instead of the mountains and said, with a simplicity that was more devastating than any elaborate speech, "You are the most remarkable person I have encountered in a very long time, Emma." And she had turned to look at him, and the distance between them was very small, and the wind off the mountain smelled of pine and cold stone, and he kissed her, briefly, carefully, as if asking a question, and she kissed him back as if answering it. Daniel, across the road, performed a victory circuit on his horse that had nothing to do with horsemanship. They did not speak of it immediately, which was perhaps a mistake. They spoke around it for the remainder of October, with a heightened awareness of each other that was both wonderful and maddening. Emma attended his Sunday dinners with a different kind of feeling now, something that had moved past warmth into something that required more courage. Alfred was deliberate and unhurried in the way he was with all important things, and Emma understood this about him. But she was also a woman who had been burned by a man who moved slowly and secretly, and the combination of her admiration for Alfred's nature and her fear of her own history created in her a particular tension she could not easily resolve. They had one long, honest conversation about it on a Sunday evening in late October when Daniel had gone to bed, and the ranch was quiet, and the kitchen was warm with the banked fire. Alfred said he had not been looking for this, and did not fully understand what it meant yet, but that he was certain he did not want her to leave in December. Emma said she had not been looking for it either and was aware that her judgment in such matters had previously been unreliable. He asked her if she trusted him. She looked at him for a long time and said she was trying to. That answer satisfied him more than a simple yes would have. He understood its honesty. November arrived cold and brilliant, and Emma Hadley was, for the first time in her adult life, genuinely happy in a place. She had not expected Montana. She had not expected the scale of the landscape, the way the sky was larger here than any sky she had seen in Ohio, the way the community, rough and spread thin as it was, held together around the common work of surviving in a beautiful, demanding land. She had not expected the children, 12 of them now swelled to 19, who brought her the world's most important questions every morning as if she were the person qualified to answer them. She had not expected Alfred Conroy. She had spoken to the school board in the first week of November about the contract extension. They offered her the spring session, January through June, at a salary that was $20 more than the original contract. She told them she would have an answer by the end of November. She told herself she needed to make the decision on its own merits, separate from whatever was happening with Alfred, because she was not going to attach her professional future to a man she had known for 4 months, regardless of how she felt about him. She told this to Alfred directly, because she had found that being direct with him was one of the fundamental reliefs of knowing him. She said she was considering the extension, but she needed to make that decision independently, and she needed him to understand that. Alfred said he understood completely. He said he would not pressure her in either direction. He said he hoped she would stay because the school needed her, and because, he said, looking at her with those storm-colored eyes that always said more than his careful words, he needed her presence, and he had not said that to anyone in 4 years, and it was both terrifying and true. Emma told him she would give him an answer by the end of November. She told the school board yes on the 20th of November. She told Alfred on the 22nd, on a Sunday after dinner, standing in the kitchen with the snow beginning outside the window, and his face had changed in a way she would remember for the rest of her life. A relief so profound it looked almost like grief, the way very strong feeling sometimes does. He had taken her hand. He had said, "Thank you," Not for choosing him, but for choosing to stay. For choosing this place and this life and the possibility of what they were building. And then came the night of the 1st of December, the night she found the letter. She had come to the ranch that evening because Daniel had left his arithmetic slate at the schoolhouse, and the boy was anxious about it, certain his work would be forgotten or erased. And Alfred had been out on the North Range checking the winter feed. So Emma had let herself in, as she sometimes did now, by tacit and comfortable arrangement, had put the kettle on, and had set the slate on the kitchen table for Daniel to find in the morning. The letter had been under the arithmetic primer that Alfred kept on the kitchen table because he reviewed Daniel's work in the evenings. Emma had moved the primer to make room for the slate, and the letter had been there, face up, already opened. She had not meant to read it. She had seen her own name. The letter was from the Denver agency, dated the 15th of November. It confirmed the arrangements Mr. Conroy had requested. His financial sponsorship of the extended spring contract, the additional $20 per month to come from his personal account rather than the school board's funds, and the request that Miss Hadley not be informed of the private arrangement so as to avoid any perception of obligation on her part. Emma stood in Alfred's kitchen for a very long time with that letter in her hands. She understood what he had done. She understood why. He had wanted her to stay, and he had been afraid that if he asked her directly, if he offered to pay to keep her here, she would feel obligated or manipulated and would leave out of pride. He had arranged the extension through the agency and through the school board in a way that looked like a legitimate professional offer, an offer she could accept or refuse on its own terms freely. He had done it out of love, she thought, or out of something very close to love. He had still done it without telling her. She was still standing there with the letter when she heard his horse in the yard. And so they arrived at that moment, Emma with her trunk half packed on the kitchen floor and Alfred in the doorway with a lantern and dust on his collar and the expression of a man who knows that the thing he feared most has arrived. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" Emma asked, not loudly. The quietness of her own voice frightened her slightly. Alfred set the lantern on the table and crossed the room and stood on the other side of the trunk from her. He did not reach for her. He looked at the letter in her hand and then looked at her face. "After the new year," he said, "when you were settled into the spring session and you could see it had nothing to do with obligation. When it was clear that you staying was your own choice." "But it was not entirely my own choice," Emma said. "The $20 more that convinced me the board was serious, that was you, the very thing that tipped my decision. That was your hand, not theirs." "Yes," he said, "that is true." She put the letter on the table beside the lantern. She looked at her trunk, half filled with her dresses, and she looked at the snow that had thickened against the windows while they spoke, and she thought about Gerald Hewitt and the discovery that had broken her engagement, and she thought about what Alfred had said to her in the schoolhouse during the thunderstorm in August. What breaks a person's trust is not the mistake itself, but the discovery that they were not trusted enough to be told about it. "You told me that," she said. He blinked. "Told you what?" "In August. You said that what breaks trust is not the mistake, but the discovery that you were not trusted enough to be told the truth. You said that to me." The silence that followed was the most painful thing Emma had felt in months. Alfred sat down in the chair at the kitchen table. He sat the way men sit when they have run out of the particular energy it takes to stand upright in the face of what they have done. He put both hands on the table and looked at them. "I know," he said. "I know I did." "Did you not remember that you had said it?" "I remembered it every day after I sent the letter to Denver," he said. "I thought about it every time I sat in that schoolroom on a Saturday and watched you teach. I thought about it every Sunday at this table. I told myself I would tell you before the end of November. Then the end of November came and you told me you had accepted the extension, and you were so pleased, and I could see that you had made the decision freely, that it was genuinely yours, and I told myself the truth of it was that you would have stayed anyway. The money was just insurance, and I would tell you in January when it would not change anything." It changes everything, Emma said, but her voice had shifted slightly and she heard it herself, and so did he. Does it change what you feel? Alfred asked, very quietly, looking at his hands. Emma was quiet for a long time. The snow pressed against the windows. The lantern burned steadily between them. No, she said finally. It does not change what I feel. It changes what I know about you, which is not the same as changing you, but it is not a small thing either. Alfred looked up. You were afraid, she said. You were afraid that if you asked me directly I would refuse out of pride or independence, and you were probably right that I might have. That does not make it right. But I understand it. I should have trusted you with the choice, he said. I should have said, I want to pay for the extension and I want you to decide, knowing that I am the one paying for it, and knowing that there is no obligation attached, that I want you to stay because I am in love with you, and the valley is a darker place when I imagine you leaving it. The words landed in the room like something very large and very gentle arriving at the same time. Emma looked at him. Alfred Conroy, 32 years old, rancher, widower, reader of books, keeper of secrets that were not malicious but were real, sitting at his own kitchen table in the first week of December with the snow outside and his hands open on the table and his eyes on her face. That is what you should have said, she agreed. I am saying it now, he said. Emma reached into the trunk and pulled out the first dress she touched, a blue wool one she had bought in Cincinnati 2 years ago, and she folded it and laid it on the chair beside her. Then she pulled out the second dress and folded it too. Alfred watched her in silence. When she had folded 3 dresses and laid them on the chair, she closed the trunk. She latched it. She straightened up and looked at him. I am not leaving tonight, she said. The snow is too heavy, but we are going to talk, Alfred. We are going to talk about this honestly and fully, and you are not going to protect me from difficult information about yourself, and I am not going to protect myself from difficult decisions. That is the condition. Alfred stood up from the table. That is the only condition I want to live by, he said. They talked until 2 in the morning. Alfred lit more lamps and Emma put the kettle on, which was, in their private language, a gesture of enormous significance. He told her things he had not told anyone in 4 years about Ruth, about the loss that had shattered the first version of himself he had built in Montana, about the way grief had reorganized him into someone quieter and more careful than he might otherwise have been, and about how that carefulness had become, with her, a trap of his own building, a way of managing a situation that deserved to be felt and spoken rather than managed. Emma told him things she had not told anyone since Margaret. About the way she had constructed her independence after Gerald Hewitt as a kind of armor rather than a genuine state of being. About the way arriving in Montana had, terrifyingly, made the armor feel unnecessary. About the fear of what it meant to trust again and want again, and the particular vulnerability of loving someone who was entirely capable of hurting her. At some point past midnight, Alfred reached across the table and took her hand, not as a gesture of romance, but as something more fundamental. The way you reach for the hand of a person who is telling you something true and difficult, and deserves to know they are not alone in the telling. I will tell you everything from now on, he said, even the things I think might frighten you, even the things I would rather manage on my own. I will trust you with them. Emma looked at their joined hands on the table. And I will stay, she said, not because of the $20 or the spring contract, because of this. Because of what we are here in this kitchen at 2 in the morning in December. He raised her hand and pressed his lips to the back of it, a gesture so old-fashioned and so sincere that Emma felt something ease open in her chest that she had kept locked for 2 years. December was the most beautiful month Emma had ever lived. The snow lay deep on the valley, and the mountains were white to their bases, and the air was so clear and cold it rang like glass. She taught her winter session, smaller now with the snow making travel difficult, 8 pupils instead of 19, but she taught them with the full force of her attention, and they made remarkable progress. Alfred came every Saturday not for Daniel's lessons, which had graduated to a more advanced state of independence, but for the conversations, which had become the architecture of something neither of them named yet, because the naming could wait. He took her riding on the days when the weather permitted. He had a steady mare named Clover that he trusted with Emma, who had ridden in Ohio but found Montana horsemanship a somewhat more demanding discipline given the terrain. She was not afraid of the challenge. Alfred found her lack of fear both admirable and faintly alarming, which he told her, and which she received with the satisfaction of someone who is exactly where they want to be in another person's estimation. He showed her the ranch in detail, which was its own kind of intimacy, the place a person has built meaning what they have built. The Conroy Ranch ran 1,200 acres along the eastern wall of the valley, with the main house and outbuildings set in a natural hollow that broke the wind from three sides. He had been building it since 1876, 8 years of work that had weathered drought and hard winters and the volatile beef market and his wife's death, and come through all of it scarred but standing. Emma walked through it with the same attention she brought to everything, asking real questions and listening to the real answers. She met Marcus Webb, the foreman, a solid, weathered man of 45 who had been with the ranch since the beginning and regarded Emma with a careful respect that told her he had watched Alfred suffer and was not willing to watch it again. She met Bess Webb, Marcus's wife, who had warm, direct eyes and no patience for pretense, and who pulled Emma aside in the second week of December to say, plainly, that she hoped Emma understood what the man was offering her and was not going to walk away from it over foolishness. "I am not walking away," Emma told her. "Good," said Bess. "He has not looked like that since before Ruth died. It is about time." Christmas at the ranch was the kind of Christmas Emma had read about in books and not quite believed in. Alfred had a tree brought in from the forest, a tall blue spruce that filled the front room with the smell of cold mountains. Daniel decorated it with fierce concentration and the somewhat anarchic aesthetic of a 10-year-old who has very strong opinions about where the paper stars go. The Webbs came with their children, and 2 of the ranch hands and their families, and Mrs. Dunmore from the rooming house who had nowhere else to go, and the schoolhouse pastor, Reverend Oakes, who was 70 years old and had the constitution of a person who had decided not to die until he chose to. Emma had brought gifts for the children, books she had ordered specially, one for each child, chosen with consideration for what she knew of each one. She had given Alfred a leather-bound edition of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which she had found in a catalog in October and ordered on a feeling. He had opened it with the concentrated attention he brought to everything she gave him, and looked up at her with an expression she did not try to interpret, because some expressions deserve not to be translated into words. He had given her a compass, a proper one, brass, with her initials engraved inside the case, E.H. He had said, when she opened it, that he understood she was a person who navigated by her own heading, and he wanted to give her something that was useful to that rather than something that complicated it. She had looked at the compass for a long time and then at him and said, "Alfred," and stopped, because the word was full and required no elaboration. Daniel had watched this exchange with tremendous satisfaction and gone back to eating his pie. The new year came, 1885, and with it the spring contract, Emma's 3rd season in Harwick. She taught the spring session and the school grew again, 22 pupils by February, the largest enrollment in the schoolhouse's 12-year history. She rode away to Chicago for more books and reorganized the curriculum to accommodate 3 distinct levels of learning, which was a system she devised herself based on observation and necessity, and which the children took to with a speed that told her it was the right approach. Alfred came to the schoolhouse, still, on Saturdays. Daniel's reading had progressed to a level that genuinely surprised his uncle, who acknowledged this with a quiet pride that was entirely free of pretense. But the Saturday visits were now, on both sides, acknowledged as something beyond tutorial support. They were the spine of the week, the thing both of them oriented toward. Alfred asked her, formally, to walk with him on a Saturday afternoon in February, in the particular way one asks when the question underneath the question is significant. They walked the road that ran east from the school toward the river, which was frozen and still under a hard blue sky. The cold was extreme and clean, and Emma's cheeks were bright, and Alfred kept slightly closer than the space between friends. He told her he had spoken to a lawyer in Billings about certain property matters. Emma kept walking and said nothing, waiting. He told her he was not a man who found this kind of conversation easy, not because his feelings were uncertain, but because the words for them came from a part of himself he had kept under lock for 4 years. He told her that he loved her and had loved her since September at the latest, and probably since August in the schoolhouse during the thunderstorm, and possibly, if he was honest, since the first day on the platform when she had looked at him with those composed, intelligent eyes and said she had no doubt the school would improve, and he had thought, "There she is," and had then spent several months pretending he had not thought it. Emma stopped walking. The frozen river glittered 20 yards to their right. "What did you say?" she asked quietly because she needed to hear it clearly. "I said there she is," he said. "When I first saw you, that is what I thought." Emma looked at the sky, which was very large and very blue and entirely indifferent to the fact that she was, in the middle of a Montana February, standing on a frozen road falling comprehensively and without reservation into love with Alfred Conroy. "I love you," she said. "I have been trying to find the responsible moment to say it for 3 months. I have concluded there is no responsible moment. It is just true." Alfred's face did something she had not seen it do before. It opened completely, the way a man's face opens when something he has been holding very carefully for a very long time can finally be set down. He put his hands on either side of her face, her cold cheeks, her bright eyes, and he kissed her in the middle of the frozen road under the enormous Montana sky, and she kissed him back with her whole heart and none of the armor. They were engaged by March formally, with a ring Alfred had ordered from a jeweler in Denver, a slim band of yellow gold with a single garnet, red as summer sunset, that he had chosen because it looked like the West at its most honest, brilliant and warm and entirely itself. Emma wrote to Margaret. Margaret wrote back in 9 days and said she was booking a passage west in June. Emma wrote to her mother and father in Cincinnati, who received the news of their daughter's engagement to a Montana rancher with the mixed emotions of people who had expected her to do something like this, and were not entirely sure they had fully prepared themselves for it. Her father wrote back and said if the man was worthy of her, he was willing to be convinced. Her mother wrote separately and said she had always thought Emma needed someone who would not blink when she looked directly at him. Alfred, Emma wrote back, had never blinked once. Spring came to the valley like a held breath releasing. The snow retreated up the mountain slopes. The river ran fast and cold and bright. The grass returned to the ranch pastures and Alfred's cattle came down from the high winter grounds, and the ranch hummed with the particular productive intensity of a spring that has been earned through a hard winter. Emma's schoolhouse was full of children who brought her wild flowers and impossible questions, and the kind of trust that is, she had come to understand, the most important currency there is. There was one difficult moment in April that tested both of them. A man arrived from Denver, a Mr. Cartwright from the Denver agency, who was ostensibly making a routine visit to the schools in his region, but who spent an uncomfortable amount of time in conversation with Emma about the possibility of relocating to a larger school in Billings, a school with a proper building and 4 rooms and a salary nearly double what Harwick offered. He made the case well. Emma listened politely and felt the pull of it in a professional sense and something colder in a personal one. She told Alfred that evening. She told him everything Cartwright had said. Alfred listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "What do you want to do?" "Not what do I want you to do. What do you want?" Emma looked at him across the kitchen table, the same table where they had sat in December in the middle of the night with her trunk half packed on the floor, and she said, "I want to stay here. I want to build the school in Harwick into something that the children of this valley deserve. And I want to marry you and live on this ranch and argue about books on Saturday mornings. That is what I want." Alfred exhaled. She watched him do it, the long, slow release of air that meant he had been holding something and could now let it go. "Then that is settled," he said. "Mr. Cartwright might come back with a better offer," she said. "He might," Alfred said. "I will give him the same answer," Emma said. Alfred reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I know," he said. "I have always known that when you choose a thing you choose it fully. It is one of the things that frightens me about loving you." "Why should that frighten you?" "Because you could choose to leave just as fully," he said, "and I would have no argument against it." Emma turned her hand over under his and held on. "I could," she said, "and I am choosing to stay. Every day it is not a passive thing. It is an active thing that should reassure you." "It does," he said, "enormously." They were married on the 15th of June, 1885, in the Harwick Church with Reverend Oakes officiating, his 70-year-old voice carrying through the small white building, with a conviction that suggested he fully intended to outlive the couple he was marrying. Margaret had arrived from Cincinnati a week before and wept at appropriate intervals and declared Alfred steady and good, which was the highest compliment in Margaret Hadley's vocabulary. Emma's parents had made the journey too, her father arriving with the expression of a man who has prepared several serious questions and finding, on meeting Alfred, that they dissolved on contact with the actual person. Emma wore a dress she had made herself over the winter months, cream-colored wool with small pearl buttons, fitted at the waist and full in the skirt, entirely practical for Montana and entirely beautiful. She carried a bouquet of the wildflowers that grew along the river road in June. Alfred stood at the front of the church in his best suit, dark brown, with a cream-colored shirt, and when she walked down the aisle of the small church with her father beside her, Alfred's face was the face of a man looking at the thing he loves most in the world, and he did not look away, and he did not blink. The wedding dinner was held at the ranch, long tables in the yard, the valley spread out in the summer evening light around them, golden and enormous and entirely indifferent and entirely beautiful. Marcus Webb gave a toast that was 4 sentences long and entirely sufficient. Mrs. Dunmore gave a toast that was 3 paragraphs long and also sufficient in its own way. Daniel, who was now 11 and had read 6 books in the past 4 months, and was developing opinions about literature that were entirely his own, gave no toast but sat next to Emma at the table and ate 2 pieces of cake and looked satisfied with the entire world. Emma and Alfred Conroy began their married life in the ranch house, in the big bedroom that caught the morning light from the east. Emma brought her books and her teaching materials and her compass and her blue wool dress and her ordering of spaces. Alfred made room for all of it without comment, which was its own kind of eloquence. She continued to teach through the summer, because the school did not close and because it did not occur to her to stop, and Alfred understood this completely and drove her to the schoolhouse himself on the mornings when the weather was difficult. The partnership they had been building since July of the previous year became, in marriage, more explicit and more rooted. They argued sometimes, good arguments, the kind where both people are fully present and neither is managing the other, and they resolved the arguments the way they resolved everything, by speaking honestly and listening without defense. In the autumn of 1885, Emma received a letter from the Denver agency proposing a formal expansion of the Harwick School, 2 rooms instead of 1, a second teacher to handle the lower grades, and a salary increase for Emma as the head teacher. The agency, it turned out, had been tracking her enrollment numbers, which had become something of an anomaly in the regional data. 22 pupils in a valley schoolhouse was remarkable by frontier standards, and several of the families who had relocated to the Harwick Valley in the past year had cited the quality of the school as a factor in their decision. She accepted, negotiated the terms herself, wrote a detailed proposal for the expansion that she sent to the agency and to the school board, and oversaw the building of the second room with the thoroughness she brought to everything she built. Alfred read the proposal before she sent it and said it was the best-argued document he had read in years, which was not a compliment he gave lightly given how many documents he read. The second teacher arrived in January of 1886, a young woman named Frances Cole from Missouri, 23 years old, earnest and capable, who took to the lower grades with an enthusiasm that delighted Emma, and who was taken to by the children with immediate and complete affection. Emma supervised and mentored and taught the upper grades and expanded the curriculum further, adding geography and natural history to the regular lessons, and by spring of 1886, the Harwick School was the largest and most attended rural school in the Billings Regional District. Alfred's ranch that year was prospering. The cattle market had been volatile across the territory, and there were ranchers to the north and east who were struggling. But Alfred had, with a foresight that Emma now recognized as characteristic, diversified the ranch's income in 1883 by adding a hay operation that served the smaller holdings in the valley. The hay was steady income regardless of the beef market, and it had proven its value in the hard years that followed. Emma sat with him over the ranch accounts in the evenings sometimes, and her ordered, analytical mind turned out to be useful in a way neither of them had anticipated, finding patterns in the figures that Alfred had been too close to the individual decisions to see clearly. He said once, during one of these evenings, that he had no idea how he had managed the business before she arrived, and she had said that was not accurate. He had managed it quite well, but that two minds were better than one when the problem was complex. He had looked at her with that expression she had catalogued months ago, the one between amusement and respect, except that now it contained something else too, something that was not a category but a feeling, and he had said, "Emma Conroy, you are the best thing that has ever come into my life." She had held that sentence for a long time afterward, turned it over in her mind the way you turn a precious thing over to see all its facets. It was in the late spring of 1886 that Emma told Alfred she was expecting their first child. She told him on a Tuesday morning before the school day, standing in the kitchen with the windows open and the sound of the birds in the yard, and the particular quality of morning light that belonged only to May in Montana. She told him plainly, because she told him everything plainly now. Alfred went very still. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took her face in his hands and pressed his forehead to hers and stood there without speaking for a moment that contained more feeling than most conversations. "When?" he asked, finally. "November," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a word, something deep and careful, and held her with a gentleness that was both new and familiar, the way all the best things in their life together were both new and familiar at the same time. The news traveled through the community with the speed of all-important news in small places. Mrs. Dunmore expressed satisfaction. Bess Webb, who had 4 children of her own, appeared at the ranch kitchen with a quantity of practical information and several jars of preserved peaches, and the air of someone who intends to be helpful and will not be deterred. Daniel, who was 12 now, and at the age when emotional information is processed through jokes, told his uncle that he hoped the baby would be a boy, because there were already too many women on the ranch running things. Emma had looked at him and said that women running things was demonstrably good for the ranch, and he should adjust his hopes accordingly. Daniel had laughed, and she had laughed, and Alfred had watched both of them with an expression of complete contentment. The summer of 1886 was Emma's 4th in Harwick, and the 3rd since she had arrived for one season and found herself building a life. She taught through July and August, a smaller session, with Frances Cole handling an increasing share of the daily instruction. She was healthy and energetic and refused to accept limitation as her condition advanced, which Alfred observed with an anxiety he mostly kept to himself, because he understood that managing Emma Hadley's choices was not a project that yielded results. He did ask her, once in August, if she was certain she wanted to teach through the autumn term as well. She said yes. He said he understood. She looked at him and recognized that he was afraid, in the particular way that people who have lost before are afraid when something they love is in a state of vulnerability, and she took both his hands in hers and said, "I'm healthy and strong, Alfred. I'm not Ruth. I know that you know that. I know that the fear is there anyway. I am not going to leave you." He looked at her with eyes that were very bright and very gray and said, "I know you are not." She taught through October. In November, she turned the school over to Francis Cole's capable management and settled into the ranch house in the productive, focused way she settled into everything, preparing for the change and reading every book on midwifery and infant care available in the Billings catalog. Their son was born on the 14th of November, 1886, on a cold, clear night with the first real snow of the season outside the window, delivered by the Harwick doctor, a competent and unflappable man named Dr. Hennessy, with Bess Webb in attendance and Alfred in the next room in the particular agony of waiting that is reserved for fathers. The baby arrived at 2 in the morning, healthy and loud, with dark hair and a set of opinions about his arrival that he expressed immediately. Alfred was brought in and stood at the bedside and looked at Emma, who was exhausted and bright-eyed and herself, entirely herself, and then looked at the child in her arms, and the expression on his face was something Emma would carry inside herself for the rest of her life. It was not the same as any expression she had catalogued before. It was entirely its own category, new love, the specific, staggering love of a person who did not know, until the moment they felt it, how large it was. "He has your eyes," Emma said. Alfred looked at her. "He has your determination," he said. "He sounded very certain about wanting to be here." She laughed, which was not the dignified response but was the real one, and Alfred sat on the edge of the bed, and she put their son in his arms, and he held him with the careful, astonished steadiness of a man learning the weight of the most important thing he has ever held. They named him James Henry Conroy, James for Alfred's father and Henry because Emma had always loved the name, and it was her prerogative. Daniel, informed of the baby the next morning, announced he was glad it was a boy, and then held James with an intense concentration that suggested he understood the responsibility of being the elder male in the next generation, and was prepared to take it seriously. Emma watched Daniel hold her son and felt a particular warmth toward the boy who had been the initial reason for Alfred to walk into the schoolhouse and therefore, in the small, true logic of how things happen, was part of the reason she was here at all. James was a determined child, which anyone could have predicted. He had his mother's focused attention and his father's steady patience and a laugh that came from somewhere entirely his own. The ranch and the schoolhouse shared the rhythm of his first year, and Emma returned to teaching when he was 4 months old, a decision she made with full information and without apology, arranging with Bess Webb and a practical young woman from the valley named Annie to share his care on school days. Alfred received this arrangement without criticism, which Emma noted and appreciated. He said once that he had married a woman with a vocation, and he had always understood that, and he was not going to become a man who forgot it because circumstances had changed. The Harwick School in 1887 had 28 enrolled pupils. Emma had written a report for the State Educational Office in Helena that outlined the conditions of rural schooling in the territory, and proposed a model for curriculum and funding that drew on her 3 years of practical experience. The report was read and discussed and cited in a subsequent legislative proposal, which Emma heard about secondhand through a letter from a government official who wanted to know if she would be willing to travel to Helena to speak to the Education Committee. She consulted Alfred. He said it was entirely her decision. She said she wanted his honest opinion. He said that the work she was doing was important and she should go, and that he and James and the rest of the household would manage very well for 3 days. She went to Helena in April of 1887 and spoke to the Education Committee with the precision and conviction she brought to all things, and the committee voted to fund the expansion of 2 additional rural schools in the Harwick Valley district using the model she had developed. When she came home, Alfred had cooked dinner, which he did rarely and with a concentration that produced results that were plain but genuinely good, and James had been bathed and put to bed, and Daniel had been sent home to the ranch, and the house was quiet and warm, and Alfred was sitting at the kitchen table reading, when she walked in with her traveling bag and her composure and the satisfaction of a person who has done something genuinely useful. She sat across from him and told him everything about the committee meeting, every detail, and he listened with his full attention and asked good questions. And when she was done, he said, "Emma, I am so proud of you," plainly, without qualification. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "You are the only person in my life who says that without also appending some concern about what it might cost me." "Everything costs something," Alfred said. "That does not diminish the thing itself." She reached across the table and took his hand. They sat in the warm kitchen in the April evening with James sleeping in the next room and the valley lying quiet and immense beyond the windows, and Emma felt the deep, settled happiness of someone who has built exactly the life they wanted in a place they did not know they were looking for. In the summer of 1888, Emma found herself expecting their second child. She told Alfred with the same directness she had used the first time, and his response was, if possible, even more immediate, reaching for her without hesitation, without the stunning stillness of the first time, with a warmth that was its own kind of eloquence. James was 18 months old and deeply interested in horses, which delighted his father and prompted Emma to develop a reading unit about animals for the lower school grades based on the same principle she had used with Daniel 5 years earlier. Daniel himself was 14 now, tall and independent and reading at a level that would have served him well in any Eastern school, and he had begun to talk about what he might do after he finished his studies, options that Emma and Alfred discussed with him seriously and without condescension. The second child was born in March of 1889, another boy, which Daniel had predicted and James had no opinion about. They named him Thomas William, Thomas for Emma's father and William because Alfred had always liked it, and it was his prerogative this time. Thomas arrived loudly and with the appearance of a person who has very specific needs and expects them to be met promptly, which turned out to be an accurate forecast of his personality. James regarded his brother with the cautious interest of a toddler encountering something new and loud and demanding of attention, then went back to his horses. The Montana winter of 1888 to 1889 was the hardest Alfred could remember, the kind of winter that broke many ranchers across the territory, the great die-up that killed cattle by the thousands in Wyoming and the Dakotas and cut through Montana like a blade. Alfred had prepared better than most, with his hay stores and his diversified income and the careful choices of the previous years, but the losses were still real, 50 head of cattle over a winter that froze the valley solid from November to April. He sat with Emma in the evenings during those months and spoke about it honestly, which was the only way they ever spoke about hard things now. He told her what the numbers looked like and what the spring recovery might require. Emma listened and asked questions and helped him think through the options, and when he was finished she said, "We will rebuild. The land is still good. The operation is still sound. We have had 5 prosperous years and we will have 5 more." Alfred had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Yes, we will." They did. The spring of 1889 was a restoration. The cattle market recovered. Alfred hired 2 additional hands and rebuilt the herd with deliberate, strategic purchasing over 2 seasons. The hay operation continued to anchor the ranch's stability. By the end of 1890, the Conroy Ranch was in as strong a position as it had ever been. Emma's school, meanwhile, had grown to a point where the state district recognized it as a model institution and sent 2 educators from Helena to observe and document the methods. Frances Cole had become a fully independent head teacher, and Emma had moved into a role that was part teacher, part administrator, writing curriculum and training teachers for the other schools in the expanded district. It was the kind of work she had not anticipated when she had stepped off a train in Harwick in July of 1884, and it was exactly the kind of work that used everything she had. She was 30 years old in 1888, and 32 by the time the school district recognized her work formally. Alfred, who was 36 in 1888, was a different person than the man who had lifted her trunk onto his wagon without asking permission 7 years earlier, though the essential substance of him was the same. He had lines at the corners of his eyes and gray coming in at the temples now, and a hardness in the hands that spoke of sustained work, and he was the most present, most honest, most genuinely trusted person Emma had ever known. They had one more conversation in the autumn of 1890 that echoed the first crisis, the night with the letter. Alfred told her without being asked about a decision he had made regarding the ranch, a significant land purchase from a neighboring holding whose owner was retiring. He had been in negotiation for 3 months and had not told her, not because he was hiding it but because he had not wanted to raise it until the terms were certain. He told her this himself in the kitchen on a Sunday evening, looking at her steadily. Emma listened. When he finished, she said, "Why are you telling me now before it's certain?" "Because I learned something important in December of 1884, he said. "I learned that the process belongs to both of us, not just the outcome." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me everything about the terms." They talked for an hour about the land purchase. It was a good decision and they both concluded as much. The deal was made in November and the Conroy Ranch grew by 300 acres. Daniel Conroy, at 16, left for a school in Billings to complete his secondary education, which he attended on a scholarship that Emma had helped him apply for, writing the recommendation herself with a precision and warmth that the scholarship committee had, by their own account, found compelling. He came home for holidays and wrote letters to his uncle and aunt that were, given his age, remarkably well composed, which Emma found satisfying in the way that a teacher is satisfied by all the right evidence. James was 5 in the autumn of 1891 and started school with Frances Cole, sitting at a small desk and regarding the whole enterprise with the focused seriousness of a child who has been in the vicinity of learning his entire life and is prepared to engage with it now on formal terms. Emma watched him through the school window on his first day, with a fullness in her chest that she recognized as a feeling that had no adequate name. Thomas was 2.5 and had strong opinions about everything and was, Alfred said with complete serenity, exactly like his mother, which Emma received as the compliment he intended. The autumn of 1892 brought another change, smaller and personal. Emma's parents came to visit, her mother and father, taking the train from Cincinnati for a journey they had been discussing for 3 years and finally undertaken. Her father, who had arrived in 1885 for the wedding with a prepared set of serious questions, and left them largely unasked, arrived now with the curiosity of a man who has been receiving letters about a life for 7 years and wants to see it. He walked through the school on a Wednesday afternoon when Emma was teaching, standing in the back of the room with his hat in his hands, and he watched his daughter teach 31 children in a 2-room school in rural Montana with the same authority and warmth and intellectual precision she had brought to everything since she was small. And Emma saw his expression change and knew what it meant. That evening at the ranch, he sat with Alfred for a long time on the front porch while Emma and her mother talked inside, and she could hear the murmur of their voices, the slow-building trust of 2 men who both love the same woman differently and find in each other a kind of mutual acknowledgement. Her father shook Alfred's hand when they came inside, and the handshake was different from the polite one at the wedding, firmer, longer, the handshake of a man giving something real. James had a younger brother in February of 1893. Emma told Alfred she was expecting their third child on a morning in June of 1892 with exactly the same directness she had used the 2 times before, and Alfred had held her in the kitchen in the morning light with the particular quality of gratitude that does not diminish with repetition, but compounds it. They named the third boy Robert Alfred. Robert because Emma had always loved it, and Alfred because Emma wanted the boy to have his father's name somewhere in the structure of himself. 3 boys. Alfred, sitting in the kitchen in February with Robert in his arms, while James and Thomas competed loudly for his attention, and the sound of Emma moving around the house came from the bedroom where she was putting things in order because that was always what she did first, had the face of a man who cannot locate a single thing missing from his life. He told her this, that evening, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet. He told her that he had spent 4 years after Ruth's death in a state of managed absence, present in his work, present in the practical life of the ranch, but not present in the whole sense, not available to the kind of life that required him to be fully inside it. And then she had stepped off a train on a hot July afternoon, and something had shifted and kept shifting, and he had, at times, been afraid of how far it would shift, and what it would cost him, and how badly he could fail at it. He said he had not failed. He said she had not let him fail. He said that the thing he was most grateful for was not the marriage or the children or the ranch or any of the specific beautiful things, but the fact that she had been honest with him from the beginning and demanded honesty in return and had not, even in December of 1884 when she had every reason to, walked away from the possibility of what they could be. Emma sat beside him in the quiet house and leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "I nearly did." "I know," he said. "I stayed because the snow was too heavy," she said. He laughed, which was a sound she had loved from the first time she heard it in the schoolhouse in August of 1884, low and real, without performance. "The snow," he said. "I owe the snow a considerable debt." "You owe the snow nothing," Emma said. "I would have stayed anyway. I had already decided before I found the letter, before I packed the trunk. I was staying. The letter just made me pack a trunk to prove I was choosing to stay rather than simply staying. There is a difference." "There is," Alfred said. "I understand the difference." She lifted her head and looked at him in the lamplight. He was 40 years old now, and she was 34, and they had been married 8 years, and she knew his face as well as she knew her own, better in some ways. She had spent more hours observing it. She knew the line that appeared between his brows when he was working through a difficult problem. She knew the quality of his stillness when he was listening with full attention. She knew the way his expression changed in the moment just before he said something that mattered to him, the slight straightening, the gathering. She knew him, fully, with clear eyes, with all the information. She had chosen him with complete information, and she continued to choose him every day with the same full knowledge, which was, she had come to understand, the only kind of love that she had ever wanted. Not the love of mystery or management or secrets, but the love of full disclosure, of 2 people standing with nothing hidden between them, choosing each other in the clear light. "I love you," she said, "with everything I know about you." Alfred looked at her with his storm-colored eyes and said, "And I love you, Emma, with everything I am and everything I have been and everything I will be. You are the home I built when I thought I was only building a ranch." They sat in the quiet house until the lamp burned low, listening to the sounds of the 3 boys sleeping and the Montana wind outside, and the particular sound of a life that is exactly what it is supposed to be. The Conroy Ranch and the Harwick School continued to grow through the 1890s in parallel, 2 different kinds of cultivation on the same piece of land and the same stretch of years. Alfred expanded the ranch operation, hired more hands, weathered the market swings with the resilience of a man who has learned to plan for hard winters as a matter of character rather than circumstance. Emma expanded the school district, worked with the State Education Office in Helena to develop a rural curriculum framework that was eventually adopted by 7 counties in Montana Territory, and received, in 1895, a formal letter of commendation from the territorial governor that she put in the cedar box under the bed, because she was not a woman who displayed her accomplishments on walls, but kept them in a place she knew exactly where to find. James, at 9, was the child most like his father in temperament, steady and observant and occasionally alarming in the precision of his attention. Thomas, at 7, was the child most like his mother in method, organized and direct and inclined to take charge of situations that did not strictly require his intervention. Robert, at 2, was himself, which was all anyone could determine at that age, but which had a quality of individuality strong enough to convince both parents that he would become exactly the kind of person who defies prediction. Daniel, who had completed his secondary education in Billings and returned to the valley, was 21 in 1895 and working on the ranch with the competence of a man who knows the land he grew up on. He had also, Emma noted with deep satisfaction, developed into a reader of serious literature and an occasional writer of letters to the Helena newspapers about matters of land and water rights that were intelligent and well argued. He was, she thought, exactly the kind of person the valley needed more of. There was a moment in the late summer of 1895 that Emma thought about often afterward. She was standing in the schoolhouse late on a Friday afternoon, after the children had gone home, arranging the books on the shelves in the particular order she had maintained for 11 years. The sunlight came through the western window in long golden bars and lit the room in the way that only late afternoon light in August does, specific and temporary and very beautiful. She had come from Cincinnati in the summer of 1884 with a 6-month contract and no intention of permanence. She had been sitting in this room for 11 years. She had built this school from 12 pupils in 1 room to 37 in 2 rooms with a third on the way. She had married the man who lifted her trunk onto his wagon without asking and raised 3 sons with him, and built a life so fully her own that she could not have designed it better if she had tried. She stood in the golden schoolhouse and understood, with the complete clarity that comes from the accumulation of many years of partial understanding, that the best things are the things you did not plan for and could not have imagined and chose anyway freely, every day, with your whole self. Alfred came to find her at 4 o'clock, as he sometimes did on Friday afternoons. He tied his horse at the post outside and came in through the door and found her standing in the light among the books, and he stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, and she turned and looked at him. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "July 1884, she said. He smiled. "The platform." "You lifted my trunk without asking. You looked like you needed someone to," he said. "I did not need anyone," Emma said. "I was entirely capable of managing my own trunk." "I know that," Alfred said, coming into the room. "I lifted it because I wanted to. There is a difference." She laughed. "There is." He reached her and took her hand, and they stood in the golden light of the schoolhouse in the late summer of 1895, the schoolhouse she had come to for 1 season 11 years ago, and the valley was enormous beyond the windows and the sky was everything. "Stay," Alfred said, not with urgency, not with need, as if it were a thing they had already decided which it was. "I am staying," Emma said. "I have always been staying, Alfred, since December of 1884, since the snow." "Since before the snow," he said. "Since before the snow," she agreed. He kissed her in the schoolhouse, in the golden light, the way he had kissed her 100 times before, with full knowledge of the person he was kissing and full trust in the one who kissed him back. And outside the valley went on being vast and beautiful and entirely itself. And inside the small wooden school in Harwick, Montana, 2 people who had found each other in the particular accidental way that the most important things always happen stood in the light and were home. The years that followed were good years, marked by the particular richness of lives that have been built with intention and sustained by love. Robert grew from a toddler with strong opinions into a boy with a talent for drawing, filling notebooks with precise illustrations of the ranch, the mountains, the horses, the schoolhouse. Alfred, delighted and somewhat surprised by this, ordered a set of drawing pencils from a catalog in Denver and presented them with the careful generosity that was the signature of his love, not extravagant but exact. Thomas became, by the age of 12, an indispensable part of the ranch's daily operation, rising early without being asked and understanding the work of cattle and land with an intuitive grasp that Marcus Webb said he had not seen in anyone so young. James, at 14, was reading the same Marcus Aurelius that Emma had given Alfred 11 years earlier, and bringing the ideas to dinner with questions that turned the evening meal into a seminar. Emma continued to teach and administer and write, her influence extending beyond the valley through the curriculum framework and the letters and the occasional trips to Helena. She was known in the state educational community as a practical innovator, someone who solved the real problems of real schools, and she wore this reputation with the same composure she wore everything, without display and without false modesty. Alfred, at 50 in 1902, was still the man who read books at the kitchen table and argued with station masters without raising his voice, and knew the sky the way some men know scripture. He had silver in his hair now and more lines in his face, and the ranch bore the evidence of his 26 years of work in every fence post and hay store and healthy head of cattle, and he was more himself than he had ever been, which was the thing Emma thought about him most often and with the most gratitude. They sat together in the evenings on the porch as the seasons turned, looking out over the valley that had been their world together for nearly 20 years. They talked about the boys and the school and the ranch and the books they were reading and the state of the world, which was changing faster than either of them fully liked, but changing in ways they could navigate together. They held hands with the ease of people who have done it so often it is as natural as breathing. On a September evening in 1902, Emma Conroy sat on the porch of the house she had made her home and watched the sun go down over the Montana mountains, turning the sky the exact color of the garnet in her wedding ring. And Alfred sat beside her, and their youngest boy was sketching the horses in the paddock, and their middle boy was somewhere on the range with Marcus, and their eldest was in the kitchen reading, and the ranch stretched out around them in the long golden light. Theirs and full and exactly sufficient. Emma thought about the woman who had stepped off the westbound train in July of 1884 with a 6-month contract and a compass of her own heading, convinced she was passing through, and she thought about what that woman had found in the passing through, the school and the community and the wide Montana sky, and one quiet, direct, honest man who had never once looked away when she looked at him. She had come for one season. She had found in the reasons to stay the entire shape of a life. "Alfred," she said. "Yes," he said beside her, "I am glad the snow was heavy." He turned and looked at her with those storm-colored eyes, exactly as she had always seen them, clear and present and entirely his. "So am I," he said, "every single day." The sun completed its descent behind the mountains, and the sky held its color for a long, brilliant moment, and the valley was quiet and vast and entirely their own. And Emma Conroy rested her head on her husband's shoulder and breathed the cold pine air of a Montana autumn evening, and felt the settled, certain happiness of a person who has found, in the one place they did not plan to look, every single thing they were looking for.